Muslims belong to the people of the book. And so I want to begin this lecture by looking at the book, at the Quran, before I would then move on to what I'll consider the fundamental beliefs, the beliefs that hold up Islam, known as the 5 pillars of Islam. So, looking at the Quran then, a little about the origins of the Quran. Now, when I talked about the historical context of Islam, the key moment in Islamic history is what is known as the prophetic revelatory event, which occurred in 610 AD, when the Prophet Muhammad received the revelation from God and the command to read or to recite. Now, the Arabic word for recitation is al-Quran. So the Quran is literally the word of God. And perhaps a way to see this is as an instruction handbook on how to be a good Muslim, which is effectively the same as saying how to be a good human being. According to Islamic tradition, God created deputies on earth. But these deputies needed guidance on how to look after the earth. Consequently, several written texts were given to prophets. For example, Moses received the Torah, David received the Psalms, and Jesus received the Gospels. But according to Islamic tradition, all of these became distorted. So Muhammad was chosen to give the final word. In effect then, the Bible is really the Quran, when it was originally recited. But human beings have, over time, lost their way. Also, the view is that only parts of what is now the complete revelation was revealed to earlier prophets. But the important point here is that God, Allah, and it should be stressed, Allah is not God's name, but it's just the Arabic word for God, is the same God as the Jewish God or the Christian God. That the Quran has the same source and expresses the same truth as the Bible. And that the previous prophets before Muhammad were, as recipients of God's message, also Muslims in this respect. Now, opinions differ as to whether Muhammad received the whole Quran all in one go, on that one occasion in 610, which is referred to as the Night of Power. Even if he did receive it all in one moment, the occasions upon which Muhammad was in a position to utter these revelations occurred throughout the rest of his life, when the situation demanded it. It's said that the Prophet would hear ringing bells in his head and would see before him the angel Gabriel. Muhammad would then repeat what God said through the figure of Gabriel. In terms of its compilation, the Quran is an oral text. It was transmitted originally orally. Although, as Muhammad would utter the words, there would be people around to record what was said on whatever was available. It could be leaves, bones, parchment, pieces of wood, even the shoulder bones of camels. These recitations were then collected together in their entirety after the death of Muhammad, with an official version being produced about 15 years later, and this is known today as the Uthmanic Codex, and it's named after the third caliph, Uthman. This is the Quran we have today. Now, what does the Quran look like in terms of structure? You have 114 chapters, referred to as surahs. The first surah is very short, it's only 7 verses. The second surah is 286 verses. The third, 200 verses. In fact, the first two surahs, the first two chapters of the Quran, make up in total around about an eighth of the whole of the Quran. So the Quran is not constructed chronologically, but in order of length. The longest chapters are at the beginning, the shortest towards the end. And in actual fact, the shorter revelations in most cases were revealed at an earlier stage in the career of Muhammad's prophecy. The longer ones are because Muhammad by that stage was a political leader in Medina, and so they're much more legalistic, whereas the shorter ones are much more rhythmic and poetic. So the structure and the content of the Quran is perhaps not what one would expect if you are a reader of the Bible, for example. It's not chronological in that way. The narrative is quite different. And for the newcomer, it takes a little while to get used to reading the Quran, but I would certainly recommend having a go. That was very briefly on the Quran, but I need to move on to the 5 pillars now. The idea of the 5 pillars as if you like, the ritual centre of Islam emerged around the 9th century. You won't find it in the Quran. And of course the term pillar is holding up something, so there's the idea of the 5 pillars holds up Islam. So they're essential, all 5 of them in that respect. Having said that, the pillars in the form of ritual actions, though very, very important, they are nonetheless considered meaningless if they're not informed by intention. As the Prophet himself states, and I quote, "Deeds are judged by intentions, and every person will receive according to their intention." So in other words, engaging in the outward practice of, say, praying 5 times a day does not in itself make you a good Muslim if your heart is not truly focused on God. Looking at these pillars then, the first pillar, Shahada, is the declaration of faith. There is no God but God. Muhammad is the messenger of God. This phrase is recited in order to witness conversion to Islam. And such a declaration entitles you to citizenship of the Muslim community, to the Ummah. It must be recited in Arabic, and again, it's not so much the recitation itself, but the intent. You must have heartfelt sincerity. You must believe what you are saying. It's also part of Muslim prayer. In its entirety, it's not actually in the Quran, but it is in 2 separate parts in the Quran. The second pillar, Salah, is worship or prayer. Muslims pray 5 times a day, although again, the number of times is not stipulated in the Quran. When you pray, you must be in a state of ritual purity, which is a reminder of the sanctity of the spiritual aspects of life. Worshippers clean themselves before prayer by cleansing the hands, mouth, nostrils, face, arms, the head, including the ears and the neck, and the feet with water in specified ways. They must face the direction of Mecca, the Qibla. And in the mosque there is a niche known as the Mihrab, which indicates where the direction of Mecca is. Prayer may be performed alone, but it is obligatory for men to attend the congregational prayer on the Friday, when there is a sermon by the prayer leader, the imam of the mosque. And the sermon can deal with a number of issues. They could be religious issues, but moral issues, topical issues that are happening at the time, political issues certainly. Though a large part of it does deal with quotations from the Quran, praises to God, etc. If you miss your prayers, you are meant to catch up at some point to make up for it later. But again, the important thing again, need to emphasize it, you're not praying for the benefit of God, but for man. to encourage humility, brotherhood, etc. You're called to prayer by the muezzin, ideally from a minaret, but it may be these days it can come from many different sources, but from a small speaker that a Muslim has installed in their house, or even, of course, from TV. In 2013, during Ramadan, this was introduced by Channel 4, causing some controversy amongst the tabloids, certain tabloids. The third pillar, zakat or zakat, is almsgiving. Here, a portion of your wealth, one's wealth, is payable once a year, so it's a kind of a tax. The word zakat means purity. So again, the idea here is that the giving of money is an act of worship, and it purifies what wealth remains to you. The poor have the right to the wealth of the rich, and there's no shame in receiving it. It's not, in that sense, a donation, but it's something that a person has a right to. You should also give it discreetly. And generally around 2.5% of a person's capital assets are given each year. Although, again, the Quran doesn't specify a particular amount. It says, just give as much as you can. And some give more. And you're encouraged to give more through voluntary contributions, etc. The fourth pillar now, Psalm, which is fasting during Ramadan. Now this requires Muslims to abstain from food, drink, smoking and sexual intercourse during daylight hours. This excludes children, the elderly and those in ill health, those travelling under certain circumstances, expectant and nursing mothers, and women during menstruation. If you miss a fasting day, you should make it up for each day missed, or provide a meal for someone in need. It takes place during the 9th month of the lunar calendar, which makes it about 11 days shorter than the solar calendar, by the way. So Ramadan is never the same time each year in the solar calendar. So when it takes place in the winter, obviously the day is much shorter, and probably it's easier to fast during the winter as opposed to the summer when the days are longer. But you can imagine how difficult it would be for, say, a Muslim living in Finland in July, when it's daylight pretty much all the time. However, in these cases, according to various scholars, it's if the day is longer than, say, 18 hours, then you can follow the time in Mecca or Medina or a nearby Muslim country. So that solves that problem. It also solves a problem if you're a Muslim astronaut, in this sense. Just after sunset each day, the fast is broken with a small amount of food at first, often a few dates. Then comes the meal, which in many cases can be quite a feast. It is considered a time of spiritual awareness. During fasting, there's much personal devotion, spiritual exercise, the reading of the Quran from beginning to end during the month. And people do spend much more time in the mosques. According to tradition, the Quran came down to Muhammad during this night of power, which is usually dated on the 27th day of Ramadan. And certainly that day especially is when you find most Muslims in the mosques. The purpose of Ramadan is the curbing of desires, and therefore to emphasize the spiritual needs over the physical needs. And also to reinforce the sense of solidarity amongst the Muslim community, amongst the Ummah. Every Muslim across the world, regardless of how much money or power they may have, are effectively in the same boat, and they're reminded of that. In this case, the Quran is more specific in stating when the month of Ramadan is and when it should take place. But again, you can fast at other times. And it ends, the festival ends with the festival of Eid al-Fitr, which in many Muslim countries is also a national holiday. The final and the fifth pillar is Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. Now this is something that every adult Muslim should do once in their lifetime, certainly. And many will save up for this occasion. And after experiencing the Hajj, they are referred to as a Haji. The ritual itself of Hajj goes back to pre-Islamic times, before the time of the Prophet Muhammad. And tradition has it that the Kaaba, the cube in the center of Mecca, where people make the pilgrimage, was originally built by Adam, in fact. Then it was rebuilt after the flood by Abraham and his son Ishmael. And before leaving home, the pilgrim must pay all outstanding debts and make arrangements for any dependents, as well as settle all affairs. Now the reason for this really is that certainly at one time, the pilgrimage to Mecca could be extremely dangerous, as well as quite a lengthy business. It could take many years to cross often very dangerous territory. Now, travel is much easier these days, and you get something like 3 million making the pilgrimage. This compares to in 1800 when there were only 20,000, or even in 1940 there were only 300,000. So such numbers in itself, which is actually the largest gathering of human beings in the world, does bring its own hazards, including diseases and death from injury, from stampedes, and these do occur every year on the whole. However, it is believed that one who dies during the pilgrimage is guaranteed paradise. The area around Mecca is known as Haram, that is, sacred space. And it requires pilgrims to don a special garb called an ihram, which is 2 simple pieces of white cloth. And this symbolizes the equality of all before God. The Hajj takes place during a specified time in the calendar. It's the last 10 days of the 12th lunar month. It lasts up to 7 days, and it ends again with a festival called Eid al-Adha. You can make a pilgrimage at other times of the year as well. And of course you can make pilgrimages to other places other than Mecca, including many at the same time will make a pilgrimage to Muhammad's tomb in Medina, and also to Jerusalem, which is considered the 3rd sanctuary after Mecca, and has been visited by pilgrims since the early times, often on the way to Mecca. And there is a hadith that says a prayer in Mecca equals 10,000 ordinary prayers. A prayer in Medina equals 1,000. A prayer in Jerusalem equals 500. I should also mention, by the way, and this relates to the lecture on diversity, visits are made also by Shia Muslims to the tombs of their imams. And indeed, Sufi Muslims pay visits to the tombs of their saints. So to conclude then, I stated at the beginning that the Quran is an instruction book in how to be a good Muslim, which is synonymous with how to be a good human being. It is a fundamental belief that mankind is created for a purpose, and that this purpose can be uncovered by understanding of the will of God. It is believed that one can find this guidance in the Quran, and by engaging in the beliefs and practices that derive from God's will, provided this is done with correct intention and heartfelt sincerity, then mankind is more in touch with his or her God-given nature.